This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Does back to school mean back to normal? The lead up to this school year certainly feels more like a traditional start when compared to COVID lockdowns and remote school 2.5 years ago. Today, Where We Live, we talk to Connecticut's chief education official who oversees a statewide public school system of more than 500,000 students. State Education Commissioner Charlene Russell-Tucker has been a lifelong educator, and in August, it was her 1 year since she was appointed as commissioner by Governor Ned Lamont. Prior to that, she was the interim leader for 6 months and then deputy commissioner overseeing educational support and wellness priorities. Now, if you're a parent, an educator, or a student, we want to hear your question for the commissioner. Our number, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. With us in studio is Commissioner Charlene Russell-Tucker. So nice to see you today.
Lucy, it's great to be here with you at the start of the school year.
A very busy time. You could hear the excitement in my voice because our listeners may not know this. You are our first in-studio guest since the pandemic began. All this time we've been talking with guests on Zoom, so it really is wonderful to have you in this room with me.
And it's a great studio, so great to be here with you.
Well, thank you. Now, I mentioned that the start of this school year already feels like we're back to normal. But when we compare this to last year's return to school, it was really punctuated by a kickoff event. You probably remember in Cheshire. There were anti-mask protesters at this event, and you, the governor, and other state officials ended up having to leave early. Here's Connecticut reporting at least one protester singled out the governor, who was escorted out of the building by his state police security detail. So would you say that the start is already calmer compared to last year?
It is absolutely calmer compared to last year, and we ourselves had our kickoff last week with superintendents back to school, gathering in person to be energized and inspired for the start of the school year.
And when you say that they're energized and inspired, what are you hearing from school leaders? Because it has been stressful the last 2.5 years.
It has been stressful. They've had to learn so many new things. You know, I said they minored in epidemiology this past few years. As educators, they were not prepared. None of us were prepared for what was handed to us. And so we've learned a lot. We've partnered a lot. And here we are. It's like, we've learned some things and what to do to keep schools as safe as possible. And so let's get on with the learning. That is the key focus. That's what our schools do, is to make sure our students are educated.
You mentioned, the priority was to keep their schools as safe as possible. So let's start with the pandemic. We know that we're living in a time where what was once COVID guidelines that people followed pretty strictly, it has been relaxed now. And so when we talk about, the environment that students and educators are returning to, how do you feel about this moment in time?
I'm very confident about where we are, again, based on the fact that we've learned so much, and we've learned to partner in new ways across state agencies, across sectors. Our district superintendents working with local public health, they've learned a lot. We've all learned a lot. And so here we are. Our kids are back in. They were last year, but there was also interruptions. We've all together learned around contact tracing and close contacts and what need to happen. There was still a lot of interruptions, and we're certainly hopeful for something that's more stable, less interruptions moving forward.
So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but when we think about this second major public health crisis in our country now, monkeypox, how are educators talking about this in schools?
So we're following very closely the Department of Public Health. They are the health experts in our state, and we're working with them. And so as they put guidance out for the entire population, schools are a part of that, and we're sharing that information with them. Again, they have learned so much. Our school nurses have stepped up, and so they're there to help to make sure that they're assisting with any new guidance and any new protocols that need to be in place.
Was this something that school leaders have brought up with you? Or is there concern that there could be monkeypox cases in public schools?
I have not heard that directly from them. Again, they're just so focused on, we've learned a lot with COVID. The mitigation strategies are still in place. We're still holding on to that. And so there's been not a lot of questions regarding that.
I should couch our information from NPR is that, the route of transmission for monkeypox still extremely rare in public settings, but it is something that people are keeping an eye on, not only in school settings, but also on college campuses as kids are back and students are back to school. You can join us as I talk to the State Education Commissioner, Charlene Russell Tucker. Our number, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So you feel confident that schools should not be tracking cases of COVID anymore or transmission, considering that COVID is still with us?
And so we still have some protocols in place, one of them being reporting cases. And so they will still be doing that, reporting that information to the Department of Public Health. It helps us to know what's happening and whether we need to do any further mitigation strategies, but just helping them out. So they will be doing that. It's just not leading with that at this point in time, again, because of all that they've learned and all the guidance that we have and the work we've done together over the past two and a half years.
It's unfortunate that when we think about public health, it has become politicized. And so when you mention not leading with this, is that also you're thinking about how the public perception of COVID and, of course, some of the pushback against some of these guidelines, how that impacted you, your staff, and educators on the local level?
So, it's been such a rough time, and we were all learning and working together. And so I understand the family's concern. I understand our educators' concerns. I understand all the concerns that were there. And that's why I call it our best-in-class collaboration, really working with public health and all our partners to say this is how we move forward. And we've weathered a lot of storms together. And I believe in Connecticut there's nothing that we can't accomplish working together.
We know that certain vaccines are required for public school students. We know that flu vaccines are something that are required. Do you think that we've reached a point where COVID vaccines should be required for public school students?
So that's a tough question, and I'll leave that up to the medical professionals. But in the interim, parents talk with their medical providers, talk with the pediatricians, and really take that good guidance and make the best decisions for students.
Again, you can join us, 888-720-9677, as I talk with the State Education Commissioner. Schools are not quite open yet, but that means parents, students, and even educators can call in with their question for Commissioner Russell Tucker. When we think about some of the challenges that public schools have faced, of course, COVID, but the consequences of people who have left the profession. I understand teacher shortages are still pretty dire in our state. I'm quoting here Kate Diaz, who's president of the Connecticut Education Association, saying to the CT News Junkie, 1,200 to 1,600 positions have opened up statewide. How bad is it for local districts, and what are they to do?
And it varies across districts, as you can well imagine. And we're in the throes of getting some information directly from our districts to see exactly where we are. But we know the issue of shortages or teacher shortages or educator shortage is not a new one. But the pandemic really threw everything in a loop for everyone. And so we've been working at the agency just to support. Kate, we have conversations all the time about what we need to do about that. We just did an 11-state reciprocity policy that allow educators from out of state who are certified in their states and similar certifications here in Connecticut to have a streamlined process to get Connecticut certification. And since we opened that up in April, we've issued over 400 certifications to educators out of the state of Connecticut. We want them in Connecticut. And so we're working on, we've done some flexibilities around certification so that superintendents can make some decisions around moving staff around. But so there's long-term and short-term strategies. Long-term, we need to make sure that we're enticing as many into the profession. This is a great profession, to make sure that we're doing that, growing our own, and we have initiatives in school districts and across the state. But another thing that we've done, Lucy, is to work with our ed preparation institutions. And so we have our students there who are into the profession who can now spend some time in classroom, getting their experiential learning, and getting paid, by the way, to be there, so they can be supports to educators and help us during this time where we are, struggling with having educators in the classroom.
It's important to entice, but how do you retain?
And so, a great question, right? So it's getting them in, but it's also retention, making sure that they've got excellent working conditions, making sure that we support them as much as possible. The pandemic was not about impacting just those students and families, but our educators as well. And so how do we make sure that their needs are also addressed? Something we just did, like those who are following us online, pre-K-12 appreciation, we wanted to say, we appreciate you for all you do. We worked with some businesses to offer some discounts and some fun things for them. And so it's about saying you matter, a critical role, a critical job to be in front of our students. You're shaping the lives of our students. And so the next generation, it's a great calling and a great profession. We want to make sure that they're there and they feel supported and respected in that role.
Mm-hmm. I know that public schools are across our state, but I wanted to focus on the city of Hartford, also New Haven public schools. They're short almost 100 positions. And so in that instance, what are school districts able to do? I know there have been reliance on substitutes, but there have been shortages there as well.
Right. And so interesting you talk about New Haven because my team was on the phone with them yesterday trying to talk through all the options that we have available and working to get these next generation students into their programs as well, into the schools. And so we truly are working as hard as we can with them to look at all the flexibilities that's available and helping them to problem solve. I know Hartford, for example, they've looked at teachers coming in from the Dominican Republic and other places. And so folks have gotten really creative about the attraction, but you're right, and retention for educators is such a key role and very important for us as we're in schools right now that we don't have that disruption or not have certified educators in front of them.
You shared with us this program to get out-of-state people to come into Connecticut or to at least be certified to teach here. But what about people within our state? Are you just not hearing from enough people that are interested in this profession? What are the challenges?
There are challenges, and we work through those. And so we think about opportunities as well. For just go right in our classrooms, we have paraeducators that are in our classrooms, right, that may be interested in the further education that they need. And so how do we support them? We just deployed $2 million for COVID relief funds to support our educational preparation institutions to make sure our students, some of their certification or licensure exams can be paid for, to make it a little bit easier for them to go through school. We also just the governor deployed some funding to make sure that educators can get some of their loans, refinance at a lower rate. So we're really looking at those initiatives as well. For those who are in-state, you're teaching in our schools, you're interested in our schools, how can we attract you into the profession?
Again, you can join us 888-720-9677 as we talk with the State Education Commissioner, Charlene Russell Tucker. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I'm really glad that you brought up the para-educators or paraprofessionals, because for people who may not have children in public schools, they may not understand the role that they play and why it's so important to have them in the classroom. We were talking with our education reporter here, Catherine Shen, who says that many paras have said a more standardized process can help inspire them to apply, and there were plans to create a more standardized certification process for paras. Tell us where that stands.
And so there were some legislative proposals that didn't pass this past session. However, again, very committed at the agency to support our paraeducators. They're critical in the classroom, providing the one-to-one supports to our students who need them so much. And so we continue to keep the dialogue open. I now have, I think this week, meeting with paraeducators to talk about how we can further support them in their role. Is it additional training? How do we support districts to support them and recognize their value and worth? And as I said before, for those who are interested in moving up, into the teaching role, how do we support them in order to do that? And so those lines of communication and commitment are totally there to support them.
We focused on teacher shortages, but in terms of what a district needs and to find enough paraprofessionals, does the state track that?
So we just, great question again, Lucy. We just opened up a new employment special education portal that we can have basically available folks across the world be able to apply for paraprofessionals or other special education positions in Connecticut. So candidates can go into that website to see what's available, or educators or superintendents, districts can post jobs there. So we open things up so that we really can recruit from across the country and across the world into that space. But you're right, we've got to make sure that those who are here in our state who are interested also have a pathway into those positions that are available.
We heard from a listener who tweeted, wants to know why haven't the Narcan units pledged for free by the manufacturer been distributed yet to every Connecticut school's med kit? And so I'm wondering if you can talk about Narcan available in public schools. You know, there was that unfortunate incident in the Hartford Public Schools that involved a young person, and you know the role of the state education department to make sure that local districts are equipped with the right kind of medicine to save children when needed.
And, so it's such an unfortunate situation. And we've provided and are providing training and support for districts, working with other agencies as well in this space in order to make sure that we have the resources that's available, our districts have the resources that they need, and the proper training and protocols for administration is something that we're working on as well. Really important.
But at the end of the day, is it up to the local school districts to make that decision? What's available to school nurses?
And so, yes, they are making those decisions with a lot of support from us. And again, there was some past legislation that we're working on for implementation to make sure that there is availability. And as I said, very important with that is also the training necessary for utilization.
You're hearing Charlene Russell Tucker here where we live, Commissioner at the State Department of Education. Again, you can join us 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. More after a short break. You're listening to Where We Live on Connecticut Public. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Connecticut Public Schools are getting ready to open, and we're talking about the upcoming school year with my guest, Charlene Russell Tucker, who is the State Department of Education Commissioner. So parents, educators, and students, what questions do you have for her? You can join us, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. We started talking about safety related to this public health crisis, Charlene. And then when we think about school safety in the wake of the mass shooting in Uvalde, we know that several local districts have added armed guards or are talking about it. And so what are the conversations that you're having within the department about making sure that, again, schools are safe for everyone during the day?
So safety is critically important. Connecticut knows firsthand of the impact when a tragedy such as the shooting in Uvalde happens in schools. And so that's why we're really continuing to work to talk about school safety. For those who don't know, that our schools are required to have school safety and security plans that they file with the Department of Public Protection on an annual basis. And so it's really important they do this, they make their plans so that they can be prepared in advance. And so certainly we're reminding our districts that those are necessary to have. But really important, Lucy, is that these conversations are happening at the local level. And this is a community conversation about what's necessary to make sure that our schools are as safe as they can be.
Mm-hmm. But when we think about how you've been a lifelong educator and what it's like to be in a classroom, what it means to have somebody walking around a school campus, an area that is armed, and what that means for children who've been traumatized, and even for adults who are responsible for keeping children safe. How do you have those conversations?
Yeah, and, it's really a matter of making sure that folks are open and having these conversations together. As a community, what are the risks, what are the benefits, and those decisions are made in collaboration with partners, with the local first responders, everyone at the table to really talk about what it is. It's charged. It's a charged issue, as you can well imagine. And our superintendents, they're in the throes of trying to make a decision, like where's the line drawn for safety, across the board. And so they're not easy conversations, but they're necessary conversations to have. And also internally thinking about students and making sure they're emotionally and socially emotionally well and mental health supports are available should also be a part of those conversations.
Again, you can join us 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I'm glad you brought up the fact that local school districts are required to submit a safety plan to the state because this was, again, a requirement after Sandy Hook. And my understanding through reporting, I believe, that the Connecticut Mirror has done, that not all school districts are doing this. They're not doing it in a timely manner. And so as Education Commissioner, how do you respond?
We're saying and really reminding them every day that you don't want something to happen and you're not prepared. And so prevention is key in this particular case. And so we do all the reminders. If there are plans that are not submitted, we reach out directly, to talk to our school leaders to make sure that that is happening because that is really important.
So I wanted to take a call from New Haven. Lou is joining us, and you can join us too, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Lou, what's your question for the commissioner?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. And Commissioner, thank you. Appreciate that you've been talking a lot about teacher retention. There's been a lot of discussion about teacher burnout over the last 2 years. One of the things that passed in the last legislative session was a guaranteed 30 minutes of uninterrupted lunch period for every teacher. And unfortunately, this is something that the public school superintendents have been pushing back against. And so, anyone else in the state who works a 35-hour work week is guaranteed a half hour of lunch every day. And so I want to hear from you exactly, where the department stands on this issue and what you all are going to do to push back against any potential rollbacks to that provision.
Thank you, Lou.
So, Lou, thank you very much for all your work and for the question that you're asking here. The uninterrupted lunch, as you said, it is now settled law. So that is required in the state. And what we do is to work with our districts to ensure that laws are implemented as required. And so we will certainly be there to make sure that there are reminders to our districts in working on this and any additional supports or guidance that's necessary from the department to do it. At the end of each session, we send out we send out a memo to our schools really summarizing all the legislation that's passed for the year, and there was a lot that was included, as you mentioned, and districts, I am sure, will be working towards that. And if it's not happening, we will certainly send out the reminders as we normally do, and support them if there are challenges in making that happen.
Again, our number, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Mike is calling in from Newington. Mike, you're on the show.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. My situation is that I'm a building sub, which is on par with being a para in a school in Newington. And with my position as a building sub, I make so little that I actually qualify for SNAP. And I feel like this is not fair considering that this position requires a bachelor's degree. We also don't get sick days. We did during the pandemic, but at least in Newington, I believe they're taking them away again since, quote unquote, the pandemic is over. So basically this is a problem of, paying bills for me. So that's basically my question/comment. I'll take the answer off air. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for calling in. So again, school districts need to rely on substitutes, but Mike's saying that he makes so little. And so I'm wondering what you can say about this issue related to workers' rights and the benefits they receive.
Sure. And so districts, as you know, the state does not get involved in setting pay rates for our districts. That's done at the district level. And, with shortages, I am sure that they're looking at what they need to do to attract and retain substitutes as well. I know rates have been going up in some of our districts. We're looking to make sure that they're competitive. So in a competitive marketplace, really, that drives compensation. And I think you will see that happen across the state for substitute rates and, frankly, even teacher pay, at this point.
When you say set at the local level, do you mean that it's the local school boards that are setting these pay rates for staff?
Yes, that's correct.
Good to know. Again, you can join us 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. A lot to talk about, but I did want to mention that the State Department of Ed has been creating a new set of social studies standards expected to roll out in the coming months. We've talked about this several times on our show, including speaking to the state social studies advisor, Steve Armstrong, who noted that given the larger political climate around what is or isn't taught in public schools, some might say this is a bad time to overhaul standards, but he thinks this isn't the time to equip teachers with specific and clear guidance. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. And, the way we've taken the approach with standards is that we don't do it in isolation. We don't do it in a vacuum. And so, I know we'll be talking to our chief academic officer, is really talking with teachers have a voice, students have a voice, families have a voice, or community leaders have a voice, and we open the door very wide to make sure that we're having these conversations when we develop those standards, when we develop curriculum, to make sure it's responsive and inclusive of those who will be implementing and teaching, and that it will really give us the benefits for our students being educated.
The person that you referenced is Irene Parisi, who's the Chief Academic Officer for the State Department of Ed, who's in charge of all the curricula standards. Irene, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Good morning.
We wanted to focus on the social studies standards and what Steve Armstrong has told us about now being such an important time to make sure that teachers are equipped with clear guidance. And so how would you respond to this moment that we're in, Irene?
I do think this is an exciting time to be able to develop the standards, as you say, so that our teacher colleagues are equipped with the right curriculum, as well as resources and how to have and navigate these conversations in their classroom. And our hope is that there's potential in doing these standards followed by model curricula, that we give teachers back time to deeply understand the standards and to be able to create those learning experiences in the classrooms for their students in front of them to see themselves in the curriculum, but also to create that community, that culture in the classroom to feel safe to have these types of conversations. And I think the right standards in the hands of the teachers will help them to be able to do that.
To give our listeners more information for those who have not been following this is going to be the first year high schools will be teaching the new Black and Latino Studies, Social Studies course. I know some schools piloted it last year. And so I'm wondering if you can talk more about, what students will be learning, and as you mentioned, partnering to make sure that people are clear on the standards and why this needs to be studied and discussed in this way.
Sure, yes, another exciting experience. And we learned a lot from this past year, as you said, from the districts that were piloting the course. We've learned of the celebrations, for sure, as well as the challenges. And so having the teacher voice with us to help inform what needed to be renewed to go forward in the curriculum was incredibly helpful for us. So again, that we get the right type of curriculum in their hands. But we really the intent of the course is to give students that opportunity to not only explore the accomplishments of those important people and figures in that time period of history, as well as what their struggles were, even the intersections of these experiences. And it really is about those historical movements. And so again, such a model curricula as this one that was developed in partnership with CERC is a valuable asset for the classroom. And so some of the things that they'll be learning certainly is about U.S. history and modern world history, as well as, like I said, the struggles, accomplishments, perspectives of African American, Black, and Latino and Puerto Rican people in the U.S. And so the students have a chance to actually examine these moments, these historical moments, and like I said before, really see themselves. And And that's what we heard from students in our showcase last year at the end of the year. They said, finally, I can be myself, and I feel like that I can contribute in the classroom in these types of conversations.
Again, you're hearing Irene Parisi, Chief Academic Officer for the Connecticut State Department of Education. Again, she's in charge of all the curriculum. Irene, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Commissioner, anything you wanted to add about this new curriculum and what Irene shared?
It is important that we're having these conversations. And I know a part of this is also Connecticut's history. And so think about the power of being able to understand the history of the state in which you live, and in some cases the communities in which you live. And so it is making this learning really hands-on and experiential for our students. Mm.
It's important to learn history, but as you know, we live in a time where people are pushing back on what history should be taught. And I'm wondering if you can talk more about that. The situation that local educators find themselves in because it has gotten politicized.
And, nothing is more powerful than having these conversations and having productive discourse. Really, it's really what it is. That is really what education is also about. And so to be able to come together and understand differences, appreciate differences, truly important. And I always say, let's sit and have conversations together so we can find common ground. It's not to shut down discourse, but to have those conversations in a real and authentic way.
Again, you're hearing the Education Commissioner, Charlene Russell-Tucker, here on the show. You can join us if you have a question related to public school education. The number 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. That includes students who may be listening. If you have a question about the school that you attend and some changes or questions about process and classes as well. Again, that number 888-720-WNPR. I wanted to talk about mental health because another issue that we've talked about on the show is that, children in our country they're in a mental health crisis. We know from the Surgeon General on down, especially the pandemic exacerbating this for many. We know that there is a student-based mental health center that was recently scrapped in Killingly, Connecticut. That vote by the school board garnering national attention. And we have heard from our education reporter, Catherine Shen, that said this happened despite the legislature spending a lot of time this last session discussing the importance of supporting student mental health needs. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about what happened in Killingly. And again, as Commissioner of the State Department of Ed, when we think about the importance of having supports for students, what does this mean for you when you hear that this is happening in a community in our state?
So, Lucy, my history in the agency is addressing issues of social, emotional, and mental health supports for students and staff, even prior to the pandemic. And this was something that was always critically important for me and for the agency. We recognized that students, in order to maximize learning, had to feel safe. They had to be mentally well, and our teachers also needed to be. So the concept of social, emotional, and mental health is one that we've always been addressing. And so, I've even gone as far as saying I have a big, audacious goal, and that's one around making sure all our schools have the requisite support necessary to address behavioral health for student and staff. And so we've been working on that. The issue in Killingly, for our listeners, it's one, there's still an ongoing investigation. A complaint was filed with the State Board of Education about the interests of the state, and that investigation is ongoing, and we're still working with the districts in this particular case. The concept, though, of making sure students have the supports to the point you make is one that we'll continue to work on, and hopefully we'll be able to have a resolution here in Killingly for our students. All our students in the state really, truly need that level of support so that they can thrive. Mm.
When we talk about mental health supports, are schools a good place, a good space for this mental health center?
It's a good space for that to occur. That is not the only thing that can happen, right? And so we have districts that are, instead of doing a center, they're making sure they have additional staff. You have social workers, you have psychologists, you have nurses, other support staff in order to take care of the situations as they arrive. Legislation this past session, legislators, with all the mental health discussions, $28 million allocated. We're getting ready to work on that grant to get out to districts so they can use that to hire additional mental health staff in schools. So there are different ways that they can address these issues, whether by putting a center in the school or working with providers. In some cases, mental health providers in the community are working hand in hand with their districts in order to support students. So there are many paths in order to do this, but we really believe it's very important to do.
Mm. I know you said the investigation in Killingly is ongoing. Some of the local board members wondered if a mental health center would infringe on parental rights. Would it?
It varies in terms of what is required in the center. Do you need parental permission to have conversations? All of those, I think, to be worked out at the local level, because parents have a very critical role to be a part of all those conversations as they're occurring, and the communities need to be having this conversation. The adults, however, need to be sure that our conversations are student-centered, and that we have to think about what's the best for supporting our students.
So when they are asking for help, we need to listen.
We need to listen.
Again, Charlene Russell Tucker is the State Department of Education Commissioner. You can join us with a question or comment, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So as listeners are aware, you've just mentioned it, there's additional money to help hire social workers and other mental health supports in schools. But right now, when we look at the public schools statewide, maybe even looking at urban districts, are there gaps right now where they don't have enough social workers to help students?
There are. And there's also an issue there for shortages. So that's something we also have to think about. But one of the things I can say, with the $1.7 billion in COVID education relief funds that came into the state, we, as the State Department of Education, established 5 priorities for those investments. One of them was social, emotional, and mental health supports. And I'm really pleased to say that over $183 million has been budgeted for investment across all our districts in Connecticut to support that particular initiative, priority. So the issue is, we've got additional state funds, we've got federal funds in order to do that. And I believe that you'll see more and more occurring in our districts because it is really such a very important issue. It is foundational to student success. And so we've got to address those issues.
You mentioned federal support. We know, how much money came into the state of Connecticut alone, COVID dollars to help with, different aspects. And I'm just wondering, when we think about mental health supports, if any of this COVID money is being used to support the hiring of staff, is it sustainable down the road?
That's a great question. We think about, folks are concerned about the funding cliff. And what's going to happen when those dollars go away. And if you invest heavily in staffing, there is certainly an issue of concern when the dollars go away. There are more dollars being also put into this area federally. So I am hopeful that as we go forward, and by the time we get to the end of those dollars, I like to call it a parachute for a safer landing. But we need to know how things work and to make sure that they're effective, which we're also talking about. So we can go back to our legislators, or we can go back to our federal delegation and say, look, these things work. We need to continue. We need to maintain. We need to sustain the funding.
Before we head to a break, Roxanne tweeted, is there any possibility the legislature will take up the issue again of awarding teachers 1 year for every year they taught during COVID that would go towards a retirement? What can you tell us?
So the conversation, I think, is one that continues to go forward with our legislators. And folks should continue to have those conversations with them. We recognize the importance, and we'll continue to work with our legislators on this particular issue as well. So I don't have the crystal ball for what's going to happen in the upcoming session, but having the conversations with our delegation, I think, is really important.
Again, our number, 888-720-9677, to ask a question of State Education Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker. We'll be back after a short break. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We're talking about the upcoming school year for Connecticut Public Schools with my guest, Commissioner Charlene Russell Tucker. You can join us, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Now, I wanted to mention some stats. The students of color comprise a little more than half of the population at public schools in our state. I believe last school year marked the first time that this number was over 50%. Meanwhile, nearly 9 out of 10 Connecticut teachers are white. Only 10% of Connecticut teachers are educators of color. Those are numbers from your department. And so I want you to talk about that and about, efforts to, diversify the teacher workforce to better represent the students in the classroom.
And so, I mentioned earlier about some of the initiatives that we put in place. That's also a recruitment initiative around diversifying our educator workforce. And we've worked very hard, including looking to see other states to see if they're making progress and what they're doing to do that. And some of the Grow Your Own and really reaching out to, or even middle school students to talk about their interest in education is a part of that. We have an initiative with young men of color that we're working on to make sure that we also entice our young men of color into the profession. And so it's looking inside our state. It's also looking outside our state. And another way of doing some of this, as I mentioned before, is reaching to paraeducators or those who are just interested in doing other work in schools to get their interest into the profession as well. And so we're working on many efforts, growing your own internally here in Connecticut, but to really attract folks into the profession. It's really important that our students are able to see themselves in their educators as well.
I wanted to paraphrase related to a conversation that we had earlier. Dortha wanted to share that there hasn't been too much talk about retired teachers. She taught for 23 years. And is there a place for retired teachers to contribute to the state, Commissioner?
No, great question. I think towards the end of last year, that we had an executive order that allowed retired teacher to come back into the workforce, and we will continue to look at that as another strategy as well, because I know some of them really would like to come back in and help out during this time.
When we talk about representation in the classroom being important, this does relate back to the mandate-driven curricula that we talked about earlier in the show. So talk about the role of professional development here.
Really important, and it is to make sure that all our school staff have the professional learning that allows them to just get deeper understanding, deeper knowledge, and the role in which they play, and sometimes we bring outsiders in to talk to them about it. And I'll go back to our back to school meeting that happened last week, and our theme for the year is "The Sky Is Not the Limit," and we have our guest speaker for that event is Dr. Bernard Harris, a former NASA astronaut, right? Who best to talk about the sky being not the limit? But he also talked about his background and experience and how he was able to achieve such high levels, even though family situations might not have been ideal. And we wanted our educators to hear that story as we talk about not putting limits on our students. So it's really important. I always think about it, if you can see him or her, you can be him or her, right? And so hearing from others, their experiences, shared experiences, lived experiences, I think is really important for all our school staff across the state, including us as well, to continue our learning.
Yeah, it's important to get that message. Before we run out of time, I wanted to talk about student achievement, because we know, especially when remote education was done early on in the pandemic, there's been the so-called learning loss. I know some educators don't like that, but when we think about learning recovery, how is your department tracking student achievement and where there needs to be more work to help them?
In a few days, we will be releasing our assessment data for this year. We assessed our students back in 2020, and we were able to learn the impact of the pandemic and how important in-person learning was, right? That was a really big part of it. And we'll continue to learn more. Will be unveiling a recovery dashboard that will help everyone transparently. And I hope for those listening that they're able to go on our EdSite data portal. We have one of the best data portals in the state of Connecticut. There's nothing hidden, full transparency, because it needs all of us to understand what our students need at this point in time for learning acceleration. To your point, we're talking about how do we really make up for what our students have lost to move forward. And it's going to take all of us. It's the school, the family, the community working together. And so stay tuned for that information. But the data are there that we're able to see how the district is doing, how our schools are doing. You can compare. You can disaggregate data by our different student group populations. Really great information for us to continue to have this dialogue about.
So that assessment will be public, as you mentioned, soon. But I'm sure you're privy to that data, as you mentioned. So what concerns you about the last 2.5 years? Something that you want to see improvement?
Really, when we think about it, we see the lag, of our different student groups, our students with disabilities, our students experiencing homelessness, and we've got to really think about how we reach out and support them. We've got incredible educators in our state. They have done a lot the past, 2.5 years. They've been on the front lines, and so we want to make sure that they're supported, that they can be their very best in the classroom, because if they're at their best, then we have great confidence that the sky is truly not the limit for our students moving forward.
It's too bad that we ran out of time, but there is a question that I'm going to drop on you. And there's not a lot of time but to answer it. But when we think about the latest chef agreement, the importance of making sure that kids in Hartford can attend a magnet, a school, the state has committed to spending the money to make that happen. But part of making sure that our schools are desegregated statewide is to make sure that suburban schools sign up and participate in open choice. Where does that stand, and what are your concerns there?
So we continue to have these conversations with our districts in this particular issue, and continue to talk about the benefits really of having our students across the system. And everyone benefits, right, from diversity. Everyone benefits from diverse student body. Everyone benefits from diverse staffing in our schools, and continue to do that. I want families to make sure when they make a decision about a particular theme that they want their students to participate in, that they're able to do that, and that our schools are embracing and supporting of all of them wherever they're being educated.
There's benefits, but some schools just don't want children from other communities. Darien voting to not have kids from Norwalk come to their school. When you see that happening in your state, when you're responsible for public school education, what more can be done?
We need to have deeper conversations, really, around what those concerns may be. And really, we need to just be frank and honest to what are the concerns that you have and why. And those are the deeper conversations that I know we need to have, and to have those at community levels, to have those at school district levels, and to have those even at the family level, right, that we're talking about this. And so, it's challenging, but I still go back to the fact that together, I believe that we should have all those conversations because that's how we move forward. Our 500,000 plus students in the state of Connecticut, they demand and require all of us as the adults supporting them to be having these conversations so that they can be their best.
Again, Charlene Russell Tucker is the State Education Commissioner. What a pleasure to hear from you. You're welcome to come on anytime. We hope you come back soon.
No, thank you. And I look forward to having more conversations so that, again, the sky is not the limit for what we can achieve this upcoming year.
I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today's show produced by Katie Pellico. Tess Terrible was on the phones today. A special thanks to the visuals and content and operations team for today's show. We'll be back tomorrow.